everybody, and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. In today's video, I wanted to talk about something very interesting, something that's not actually in Unreal Engine 5 by default, and that is landscape elevation. So I came across this article, which is a very interesting article, about how they used elevation in order to effectively use that as a parameter driven system to allow for various things to happen in a game like Star Citizen. So it's it got me thinking, and I started looking around, and I spoke to somebody that I know, a guy called Damien. He gave me a link to somebody on a forum in Unreal Engine that created an elevation shader for our landscapes or meshes or things like that. So this gave me an idea. What if we could use this to drive a shader for faraway meshes, for landscapes or things like that? So today I just wanted to share that with you because I find it to be very, very useful, and I find it to be, one of those things where they should be in Unreal Engine, but they're not by default, which is very odd because you'd want to sample that data and be able to use it in your world building efforts. Now, this project will be available on Fab for you to download. You can get the Icelandic or whatever, the mountaintops for free from Fab if you want, or head on over to my Patreon page where you can find it there as well, alongside another 50 plus projects for the price of a coffee. So if you want to support the channel, if you want to buy me a coffee, then have a look on Patreon. If not, as I said, you can get the project from Fab for free, so you can follow along or, start from scratch. That's fine. So without any further interruptions, let's begin the tutorial. Okay, so what we have here is an Unreal Engine project with a bunch of faraway meshes, so things like mountains and hills and things like that. And this is actually available on my Fab marketplace. So if you go on my Fab profile, I'm going to leave a link in the description. You can actually get these free mountaintops for Unreal Engine, so it's a free project. And in here, you can obviously just get the project, download it, and then you can start using the meshes that we have in here. And the reason why I'm using these is because they offer the perfect backbone for us to build the shader, the elevation shader, and the shader that's going to be controlled by the elevation shader. Now, this particular project here only has some very simple, like a snow line here where we can just play around with some of the snow on these mountains, but it's very bare boned, and it just allows us to add a bit more snow on the base of the mountain here, right there where there's like grass and stuff like that. If we pick this up, right, and then we lift this snow line, you can see there that with the slope I can kind of just show you how much I'm building up some snow over there, but it's not really as useful as for example having this entire mountain made out of just rock and grass, and then having the snow as an extra layer. But with the elevation shader, this is what we're going to achieve. Now, I want to show you where this whole thing came about. So if we go over into here where I was showing you the mountaintops, I found this interesting article sent by a very good friend of mine on Discord called Damien. He sent me this article from Robert Space Industries. It's all about Star Citizen. So what they've done in Star Citizen, they created this system called Genesis, which allows them to do various different things in relation to their biomes. And one thing they showed in here is elevation. So they've got this thing where they're talking about things like the sea level, and then they've got these, like the mountaintops are pink, and then you've got in between like green, blue, and then it goes over to sea level being red and things like that, right? Now, we don't actually have a direct a setup like this in Unreal Engine, but luckily somebody on the forums created something similar. It's not exactly like Star Citizen, but it's not that very far, and can obviously be tuned in to work like Star Citizen. So if we look in this image here, basically we've got the depths of our landscape as dark blue to black, and then it goes all the way up to red as the highest altitude point, and then this red becomes white as it keeps going up. So this is done based on the world position, and this is very useful because you could have a layer of, for example, a grass here onto the blue area, and then in transition to be something like cliffs and rocks, and then high above it could be mountains, like snow peaks and things like that, right? And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, looking at the shader that this guy has put together in here, this user, I had to make some modifications to this to actually get it to run in Unreal Engine 5.5, and 5.3 seems to be very similar, same kind of problem. It won't work just like this, so we need to actually modify it in order for it to work properly. But that's what we're going to do right now. So let's begin creating the elevation part, and then we can move on to the shader that's being controlled by elevation, just so we can kind of see what this is useful for. So here is the same map, but now using the new elevation material. I've also got the Atmos Forge here in the scene, and I am going to actually turn off these cloud shadows so we can actually see the detail of what's going on here. So I'm just going to go over into my directional light and then turn off the cast cloud shadows. And what we're seeing here with the elevation material is a bunch of settings that have come together to allow for these mountains to have snow on the top, and it just goes away at the bottom. So we can open the material instance in here, and we'll be able to see that we've got a few thresholds, like for example this scale threshold that allows us to change the contrast between the various different elevations, and then we also got this ground level here, which allows us again to bring in more snow or lift it all the way up again like that. And this is just simply, you know, just allows us to have some snow there at the top and nothing on the bottom, where it's now turned between the rock and grass. Obviously these aren't very detailed textures from up close because they are on meshes that are meant to be very far away, but if we lower that ground and then we get some snow all the way till about here, we also have a slope mask, which is allowing us to, for example, add more snow or on one side or the top or the other side, which is again giving us more control over how we author this scene. Obviously we can make these transitions of snow to the ground and the rocks and so on to be a lot sharper if we want, but we're going to get into that later on in the tutorial as we develop the shader. So let's now start with the elevation shader and then move on to the other, so you understand how it's all functioning from beginning to end. So I've added in here a new material to one of these meshes, right? And it's all black. And then we're going to go in here and start our node setup. The first thing we want to do is want to bring in a world position. And if you're on an Unreal Engine 5.5 or above, you will have the Z axis over here to use. If not, you can use the XYZ and just use a component mask and only allow for the B channel to flow through, which means that we're only using the height data of the world position. Now from this Z point, we're going to put an add node, and then from here we are going to add a divide node. Now these are going to be very important because in the first one here we are going to have a ground level parameter, and this is going to go over into our add node, and then another scalar parameter called scale of our red, green and blue mix that we're doing on the elevation. So we're going to put that there as well. Now to give them some rough figures in here, we're going to put 7,300 for the ground level and 3,600 for the scale. Now from these points we are going to make the rest of our node, and this is where we're going to add the if node. So this is going to be added 3 times like that. And what we're going to do here, this is going to be the red one, this is the green one, and this is the blue one. These are all controlling these particular setups. Now to make things easier, we're going to create a new parameter. We're going to call this red. We're going to plug this over into the B channel over here, the B slot. Then we're going to make a green one and then a blue one as well. Now that we have this set up, for the divide node, we want to plug this into the A channel over here for each of these if nodes like that. And this allows us to effectively use our divide function from the world position here to to be used as the A value for our if node when we're doing these comparisons. Now from the divide node in here, we're going to drag out and we're going to do subtraction. Now each of these subtractions, like for example, if you want the red channel here, we are going to subtract by a value of 3. And this one is going to connect over to some make floats that then is going to end up being into our if nodes like that. But before we do that, we want to have another 2 subtract nodes over here. And this one is going to be a value of 2, and this one is going to be a value of 1. Okay, so these are 3 subtract nodes like that, simple, right? And then this divide node will connect into the A value of each of these subtract nodes like so. Now we want to add some make float 3 nodes, and again we will need Roughly, well, we will need 4 of these. So let's put them something like that, because this is how they're going to end up, basically. And the first float here it'll go into the if A is bigger than B. And then the second float, this one, is going to go into the if A is smaller than B. Okay, now the first if node, the red one, is going to connect to the if A is larger than B over here, while this one will connect to this one if A is larger than B again, right? And once we have that, we're not going to do anything with the if A equal B. We're not going to do anything with those nodes. Instead, what we need to do now is take this float from here and connect this to the if A is smaller than B, and then this one will connect to this one here if A is smaller than B. I'm going to try to give you a bit of an explanation while we're doing these permutations once we have the rest of the layer in place. I'm going to pull these subtract nodes over here like that a little bit, and I am going to create another one here, which is going to be a subtract by 1. Okay, so we have this first subtract that we've got over here, and this will connect to a saturate node, and we're saturating these values, and then we want to connect them to the first float, which is going to be the Y value and the Z value over here, like that. And then we're going to plug a value of 1 into this make float. If we don't do this, we're not going to get the color red, basically. So we've got that in there for the first if. So you could argue that the first if is now done, right? Now the second subtract, which is this subtract by 2, we are going to connect this to the x value. Give me 1 second, to the x value of this make float over here, and then we're going to connect this to the B value of the subtract node, and we'll leave the subtraction 1 subtracted by this subtract, okay, the value from this subtract, and this will then connect into the Y value of this make float. We're not going to connect anything into the Z value over here. Now this last subtract will connect to the Y value over here of this make float free. And then we want to subtract again, so the value that we have there subtracted by, well, we want 1 to be subtracted by this value, right? And it goes over into the Z value of this make float. And bear in mind that this float connects to this if node over here. Just make sure that you connect these properly, otherwise the effect won't look as what you intend. Also, you can right click over here and start previewing the node, just so you can see if there's anything happening over there right now, but not quite yet. Now from this divide node, we want to connect this all the way down here into this Z value of this make float. Now to make things a little bit easier, I can just drag this out like that a little bit, so we can kind of see what's going on. Now one thing that we need to also add to these values here for red, for example, we're going to add 1.5 as a value. This green one is going to be 2. And then the blue one here is going to be a value of 0.5 for now, but we will experiment. Now, once we have all of this, we can plug this over into the base color like that. And the node setup should in theory be fine. We'll click apply, and then we'll see our result onto the actual mesh. So the mesh right now is completely white. And if we lift it up from the ground, you will notice that it does have over here, it does have some of these values going on, but they're not properly being seen, and they're obviously very much dependent on hitting another mesh. So what we want to do now is go in here into these, have a look at all of these values. So we do want to open the material instance that we created for this mesh, just so we can actually start playing around with these elevations. So we have the red, green, ground level, red, and scale parameters. Now, if we start playing with the scale, you'll notice that if I bring this up, we will be able to kind of bring these values as we want them between red, green, and blue. We can also play around with the ground level if we want to decrease it, or if we want to like really go the other way and take it all the way up into the sky. Obviously, black will be like its very own a different kind of metric in there. Now we're going to go here to the blue, green, and red. And what I want to do, you can see that there's kind of a sharp edge right here on the blue. So I want to adjust this blue until that sharp edge evaporates. And now it's gone. It's fully blended here. And then we have the green, which is the same kind of thing. You know, you can bring it all the way down, or you can bring it up all the way again till it kind of disappears, but you do need to also bring that red up. So this is the point where you kind of have to start balancing these colors out in order for your elevation to look correctly. So again, I'm just gonna bring this green. It might be, yeah, the green might actually have to go somewhere around there. It's always gonna be the slope between the blue and the green is always gonna be the smallest transition point, right? And now we're gonna bring the red a bit further down, maybe something like that. So red seems to be a number 3 here, where it's looking good, green number 2, and blue number 1. Okay, and now what we can do is we can play with this scale if we want to lift these up and make them larger, or we can bring them down like that to make them sharper. Now with the ground level in place, we can just bring them a little bit further down, something like that. So this is going to be the base that we're going to use for our elevation. And you can already see that we've got about 3 types of metrics here. We've got this white out, so this is the tallest point within the map, so that white, and then we have the red. We have a yellowish over to green and then to blue, and then obviously if we would keep going, you know, if we would keep playing around with these elevations, it would be black at the bottom, where there's basically an absence of these gradients. So that could be another layer if you think about it, right? But in our setup, we're only going to play with 3 different textures that's going to be laid onto this elevation mask in order to allow us to build our shader. At this point, the shader for elevation is done. There's a lot more that can be done to it, don't get me wrong. There's a lot more additions that can be done here to make it so it's more complex, like what they have here in like what they have here over into Star Citizen. The thing is, for them, they're using this system in order to have like weather events or how plants grow or things like that. And you can do the same thing with this elevation material. You can actually use this to allow certain rocks to spawn, like a foliage type to spawn, or trees or things like that based on that elevation. But in our case, we're going to use it for how the shader looks like, mountains and grass and rock. But for them, they use it for different other things. And you can see that they're using a very sharp edge between transitions, while we're using a lot, we're actually doing it this way so that the shader looks nice. Again, they're using it for biome setups. We're using it for a shader purpose. Now I just want to break this down a little bit for you, because I know the graph looks a little bit intense, but it's nothing really going on here. We're using make floats to combine the RGB channels of our input. Basically, we're taking the world position and we're dividing this, and we're getting its value. We're normalizing that value, we're getting it, we're saturating the value and we're getting it. And we're trying to use these if nodes to kind of dictate whether or not we should show red or green or blue, depending on elevation. And we're combining all of these with these make float nodes, and we're effectively checking with the if nodes between the values to see where, if the red needs to be at the top, the green at the middle, and blue at the bottom. So this is kind of what this whole thing is doing. So even though the graph looks busy, the logic behind it is quite straightforward. Get the height, compare it to the thresholds, and output the right color band to then be displayed across the mesh in world position units. That's kind of it. It's not very complicated, but again, it doesn't exist in Unreal Engine, so, as a straightforward method. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but what can this be actually used for? The output here of this mask, we could create a name reroute, and we could call this elevation mask. Okay, so now we can actually reference it anywhere in our shader to use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect it from the base color, as I don't want to use it there. I want to use it instead as an alpha. One thing before you use it for anything, you do want to mask it as a grayscale. So we are going to use a component mask here and only allow for the red channel to push through. This means that our output now is going to be actually black and white. So if we preview this, you will notice here that is now white, but obviously we know this is an elevation mask that will have some contrast in between. Now what we're going to do is also going to use the material attributes here, so we can only connect one thing over here to the whole setup. So one node that I love to use with this elevation setup is the node that allows us to connect 3 different textures into an output. So we're going to use a lerp and it's free color, right? Lerp free color output. This allows us to use 3 different texture sets and an alpha. In this particular case, it could be our elevation mask. So, sorry, not the component mask. We can type in elevation mask. And this can be used like this in order to allow for 3 different texture sets to pop through. So why do I say 3 texture sets? Well, because this is allowing us to put in a V3 setup. And this also means that we could actually lerp in between multiple different things. Like, for example, we could have a lerp between 3 different texture base colors, 3 different normals, and 3 different roughnesses, as an example. So let's do just that right now. I'm going to go over into my iceland material into textures, and I have in here a snow material. So I can drag that in. It's as you can see, it's 3 textures. I can also go over here and have a look at I have this dirt material, so I can bring this in. And then over here, I've had this forest ground, so I can bring all of these 3 textures as well. So all of these are 3 texture sets that can now be used in to be lerped between, in order for us to allow for different kind of setups. Now, I'm going to show you how I'm going to link the first texture set, meaning the base color, which is this one here and this one. And then this one, right? And then I'm going to do the setup for the other ones very quickly in the background, so we don't have to waste time on the tutorial doing this. So the first thing you want to do here is we want to take the first texture, which is this one. We put it into the A channel, and then this one is going to go in the B channel, and then this one is going to be going in the C channel, and we already have the elevation mask. Now, this result here, right, is a base color, and this base color we could use a make material attributes, right? And this can go over into the base color like that, and this can now connect over into our material attributes like so. Obviously it's missing a normal and a roughness and anything else, but it doesn't really matter because, and as I said, in our context here we are just doing the base colors. Going to click apply, and then we're going to go over into our world. And there you can see that we have over here, this is the base color, and the snow is at the bottom, and the I believe the forest is at the top. Now, one problem that we have is obviously tileability. So the next thing we want to do is set up a texture coordinate. So bring in a texture coordinate, put a multiply and a scalar parameter, call it tiling. Okay, we're going to set this up to 1 for now and plug it in like that. And you want to put this into the UVs of each of these textures that we've connected, so that we can control the UVs of the material. Now I'm going to press apply, and I'm going to go back into our world here. Going to bring our material instance again and enable tiling. Now, as we change tiling, let's say to like 100, maybe 100 is too much, maybe if 20-ish, maybe 50, I don't know, something like that. You know, you'll have to play around with the textures to see what we can get. Obviously, all of these textures are part of this project if you download it from Fab. But the problem that I've got here is that the snow and the forest ground are effectively the other way around. So this is very important. This is why it's good to always do the base color first. So what we want to do is we want to swap. We're going to put the forest over there and the snow over there like that. We might even want to, I would argue that you should take all of this and put it here at the top, right? And then put the snow at the bottom, so that it kind of makes hierarchical sense from a structure point of view, right? And now it's not as visually cluttered as it was before. So now you can see that we've got the forest ground at the bottom right here. Look, that's the forest ground. And then right here in the transition, we have the rock, and then we have this snow. Obviously, without normals, it looks very awkward or very weird. And then it's got the same roughness value all across the board, which is again not very useful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a setup for, we're going to do normal and the roughness in the same way that we did the base color. So I'm not going to go through that here. I'm just going to skip over to that part. You just do it on your own and you should be fine. And just like that, we now have normal and roughness. And look at that, isn't that just coming together quite nicely? Now, if you have a look over here, what I've done is obviously we've created 3 different lerps. one for base color, roughness, and normal. And then we've connected all of our nodes in such a way that it makes sense. So the forest is going to be in the A value for each of these lerps, while the cliff is going to be in the B value, and then the snow is going to be in the C. Okay, now what we want to do, because right now we have some very, very, how should I say, engineered lines across, we're going to now use a slope mask to break this up. So what I want to do is I want to do a slope mask between the cliff and the snow. Okay, so what this means is quite simple. Over here onto our inputs, so for base color, for example, we've got this C here, which is a snow material. So I want to bring in a lerp node, and I can take this particular snow output and I'm going to put it into the B value over here, and I'm going to take over the rock, going to put it into the B value like that, and this is going to go into C. Okay, now if we press apply, obviously nothing happens because we have nothing in the alpha. So this is where we're going to bring in a slope mask. And the slope mask, we're going to, right click over here and create a parameter for the slope angle, another parameter for our fall off power, and then another parameter for our cheap contrast. Okay, we don't have to do anything with the tangent normal over there, but the result is going to go over into the alpha like that, and now we can press apply. Now obviously we haven't done this for a normal or roughness, we've only done this for our base color. So over here we have cheap contrast and fall off power. So now I can increase some of these values like that, and you can see in here that it's not a lot is going on because right now we haven't yet properly dictated the slope angle. So the slope angle is currently black. We want to put the blue channel over to 1. We're also going to put the alpha over to 1 as well, just like that. And now we can play around with the cheap contrast and the fall off power. So you can see there, if I put the fall off power to maybe like 2, and the cheap contrast maybe something like a 0.5, you can see there we have a fall off between the snow and the rocks. But in order for us to properly do this transition, we should most likely play around with actually, with the roughness and normal as well. So these lerps, this particular lerp here, what we've done, we can do another one over here for normal, and then another one here for roughness. So the slope mask is going to go into the alpha of all of these like that. And now we want to take the output for the rock and make sure that when we put this in the A value, so it has to be in the A value here as well. And then we're going to take this, going to put in the B value, and this goes in C. Sorry, there's another thing here. We should leave the normal of the rock into the B value as well, because we're only doing the blend on the C value here for the snow itself. So we're only affecting on the elevation mask, we're only attacking where the snow is at the top. We're not attacking the rock where it is at the middle. Okay, and then the same thing here. This needs to go into the C value, and we're going to take this, put it over like so, and then this is gonna go over like that. And now we're gonna press apply, go back to our mesh, and this should now look a lot more, the transition itself should be a lot better. Now, as you can see, it's a bit strong, isn't it? So we do have to play around with these settings in such a way that it's, it kind of makes sense. Like we don't want it to be too harsh. So over here where we've got the cheap contrast again, we could possibly make it a bit more like that. And then we can have a look at, not the scale, sorry, the fall off could be a bit more like that. Now, one thing that I, when I look at this stuff and I can see that there is the transitions themselves aren't that great, it's generally because you want to be able to kind of dictate some of the, the slow power, the tiling itself could also affect this. So you want to play around with these settings until you get the right value, but it can also be the elevation mask that isn't allowing for for this to fully transition as we would like it to, right? So it's always about balancing between some of the metrics that we're using. As you can see into this material that I've done here, the snow is a lot more strong at the top than what it is towards the bottom, but here it seems like the rock is kind of taking over. And this could also be because of where the snow is situated. Like the snow might need to be on the blend above the rock. What I mean by this is, if you take this and you put it over into the A value there like that, and then this goes into the B, right? So again, this goes into the A and this goes into the B. So we're effectively swapping around the actual blends themselves. This can again have an impact on how this all looks. Obviously, we've now swapped the rock with the snow. So now the rock will show up onto the more flatter points of this, which might make sense or may not make sense. If you understand what I mean. It's it's really dependent on the type of material that you're kind of going for. So you can see there now we've kind of swapped it about like this, but again, that might not be the right look. So let's just further refine this until we're happy with what we're getting. Now again, this snow that I'm using is a 1K snow, and I believe that the snow that I've used here was definitely higher quality as well, so that can help. Obviously, the better looking snow or texture in general is going to help, versus what you're using over there. So what I've done here now, I've changed the texture on the rock to something a bit more that works a bit better for what I want. But I'm also going to use a multiply node here to change its color a little bit. So we're just going to do a sort of like a dark blue kind of tint, not too much. We're just going to have to see how that all looks like, because again, you see, something like that is going to help our snow work a lot better, in my opinion. So if we get over the material instance now and we have a look, we could do cheap contrast, maybe something like that, and then look at the fall off power, something like that, and I can bring this ground level probably till about there. And we have, as you can see here, we have the rock over into the forest ground. So that's where the rock is, that's where the forest ground is. But one final type of lerp that I want to do is for the actual, I want to do a lerp for the actual rock and the actual grass. So we got the grass up here, and we know the grass is always going to be into the A value. So we're going to bring another lerp like that in here, and we want to do the lerp between the, as I said, the grass and the rock, which again is going to help drive a bit more of the intricacies of the layer. So when we put them in there like that, press apply, this is just going to allow for the rock and the grass on the bottom to kind of blend with each other, based on slopes. And it's going to be quite transformational. As you can see, it's already adding a lot more interest over into the scene. But we obviously want to do this for the rest of the nodes as well, for normal and for roughness. Obviously, this has now become a bit more elaborate of a shader, but it can drive so much more detail for your distant meshes than what it did before. So let me just do these lerps for everything as well, and then I want to show you one final trick with this elevation before we wrap it up. So finally, here it is. After some modifications, I have basically made the environment that I wanted with using two types of slopes. So I've created a grass slope and a snow slope, and this allows me to kind of have a nice transition between this rock and this grass, which is, I find it to be very nice in order to like get some more interesting sort of shapes in there. So for example, if I do this as a -5 here, I'm effectively inverting the mask, the slope mask. So this can be really good to creating some really nice shapes here, like a valley, and then you have these cliffs here. Again, I'm just using the material. I've just kind of reset the material back to its original texture, the rock, because I wanted to be able to showcase just so you can see it properly. And then we have another snow one here. So this is going to allow us to control the snow, and we obviously have the elevation that's allowing us to bring the snow line further down like that. And again, once we bring the snow line down, we may want to bring in more grass, but the grass lerp, the slope lerp, is effectively changed by the elevation slope. So in the material here, if we have a look, I have done two separate slopes. One is for snow, one is for grass. But you've got to look at, when are we doing the lerp? We're doing the lerp here before the elevation. There's nothing stopping you from doing the slope, slope stuff after the elevation. So what I mean is, like, you could go in here, right, and create other different types of effects by taking the elevation setup and then running it through a slope mask rather than the other way around, in order for you to not override with the elevation the entire material, like what you see right now, right? Like, once the ground level is low enough, I can't do anything with the slopes anymore for the grass and the rock, because it's already underneath. But obviously I can still play around with the elevation of this snow. So right here, like a snow and rock, as you can see, this is, I mean, again, this is really nice. Like, I'm just gonna say it, right? It's really nice, the kind of effect that we can kind of get in here. I mean, look at that, right? This is, now we have snow at the bottom and not a lot of snow at the top. But then we could increase the, decrease the ground level, so it's kind of going up, or, you know what I mean, like just like that. But we can also take the scale into effect, which is allowing us to have a nicer, more gradual transition. I mean, this from far away looks really good. And when you pair it up with something like the Atmos Forge as well, to have like these clouds that are very close, as you can see, they're actually scraping around the mountaintops there. I mean, this is really good for a setup of a scene in which maybe you have a ship flying or something like that, or maybe, as I said, like a backdrop for your scene. And that was it. That was the tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I found it to be very, very useful in my workflow. I've actually employed this technique in a few projects that I'm working on, and it's actually been very successful. So I'll see what I can do with it going forward, what else I can sort of like add to it or remove from it, or, improve its performance. I find the if nodes generally are a bit more, heavy on performance. So there must be another way for us to do it. But that's, again, that is for another time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for all my patrons and all my supporters. If you want the project, head on over to Patreon or Fab. And as I said, for the price of a coffee, you can get access to 50 plus projects if you want to support the channel. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.